Revenge is a silver blade, cold to the touch and perfectly balanced for the moment of final impact. Follow the calculated journey of a soul who waited in the shadows to reclaim the justice that was stolen away. Subscribe now and watch the scales of fate finally balance out.
I never thought 31 years of working homicide would prepare me for the worst betrayal I'd ever face. I'd stood over crime scenes in the rain. I'd delivered death notifications to families at 2 in the morning. I'd sat across from killers who smiled while they lied. I thought I'd seen everything a human being was capable of. I was wrong. The worst thing I ever witnessed happened inside my own house, in the valley where my wife and I had built our entire life. And it was committed by someone I had trusted with my daughter's heart. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm 63 years old, retired after 3 decades with the Roanoke County Sheriff's Office, and the instincts that helped me close over 200 cases never fully switched off. My wife Ruth always teased me about it. "You'd investigate the mailman if he delivered a package crooked," she'd say. She wasn't wrong. Those instincts are the reason I came home from my fishing trip 4 days early. And those instincts are the reason we still own our home. Ruth and I bought the property outside Daleville, Virginia, back in 1991. 22 acres of farmland backing up to the Blue Ridge foothills. A farmhouse that needed everything when we signed the papers. We replaced the roof ourselves the first summer. I rewired the electrical the second year. Ruth planted an apple orchard along the south fence line that now produces more fruit than we know what to do with every September. We raised 2 children in that house. We buried 2 dogs in the backyard. We watched meteor showers from the porch and counted deer in the morning fog for 30 years. It was never just a house. It was everything. Ruth retired from pediatric nursing 2 years before I did. When I finally turned in my badge, we thought we were stepping into the quietest, most deserved chapter of our lives. Our daughter Amy, 34, had married 4 years earlier. Her husband was a commercial real estate broker from Roanoke, with sharp clothes and a sharper smile. Our son Daniel, 31, worked as a CPA downtown and lived 20 minutes away with his wife and their little girl. We had Sunday dinners. We had holidays. We had the kind of life that looks like a painting from the outside. What I didn't see was the rot spreading underneath. I'd driven up to Smith Mountain Lake with 2 retired colleagues for what was supposed to be a full week of bass fishing and absolutely nothing else. No cell service nightmares, no news, no obligations. We rented the same cabin we'd rented for the past 6 years. By the 3rd morning, one of the guys got a call from his wife, a medical situation. Nothing life-threatening, but enough that we all agreed to pack up and head home 2 days ahead of schedule, rather than leave him to drive alone. I pulled into our gravel driveway at 11:30 on a Wednesday morning. Ruth's car was there. Amy's car was there. And parked near the barn, angled like someone had arrived in a hurry, was a silver SUV I didn't recognize with a real estate company decal on the back window. I sat in my truck for a moment. 31 years of reading scenes before walking into them. The back door of the house was propped open. A man in a sport coat was standing in the yard taking photographs of the barn with a professional camera. He hadn't noticed me pull in. I got out quietly. From the porch I could hear voices inside. My son-in-law's voice, smooth and confident the way it always was in rooms where he was selling something. And another voice, a woman's, professional cadence, asking questions about square footage, well depth, acreage boundary lines. Questions a real estate agent asks when she's preparing a listing. I did not go through the back door. Old habit. I walked around to the front, let myself in quietly, and stood in the hallway listening for Ruth. The house felt wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. 30 years of marriage gives you a sense for your wife's presence in a home the way you can sense weather changing. Something was off. I walked to the bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was half closed. I pushed it open. Ruth was sitting on the edge of the bed in her housecoat, still in it at nearly noon, which she never was. She looked up at me, and her expression wasn't relief or surprise. It was confusion, like she was trying to place me. Then it cleared. "Bob." Her voice came out thin and uncertain. "What are you doing here?" Something grabbed my chest and squeezed. I came home early. I sat down next to her. Ruth, what's going on? Why are you still in bed? She pressed one hand against her forehead. I don't feel right. I had my tea this morning and then She trailed off. I felt dizzy. Amy said to lie down. Amy said to lie down. I looked at the nightstand. An empty mug. I picked it up and smelled it. Tea. Chamomile. And something underneath that didn't belong there. Something faintly sweet that had no business being in chamomile tea. I set the mug down carefully and kept my voice level. I'm going to talk to Amy. You stay right here. Don't sign anything. Don't go anywhere, just stay in this room. She nodded, still foggy. The dizziness, she said again. I'm sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me. Nothing is wrong with you, I told her. And I meant it with every certainty I had. I walked back through the house to the kitchen. Amy was leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, wearing an expression I'd never seen on my daughter's face before. Not guilt exactly, something more complicated, something that looked like a person who has made a decision and is trying very hard not to look at it directly. My son-in-law was at the kitchen table with a woman I didn't know, spreading printed documents across the surface. He looked up when I walked in and did something impressive. He didn't flinch. After 4 years, I still had to give him that much. The man could pivot. Bob. He stood and extended his hand. We weren't expecting you until Sunday. I didn't take his hand. I looked at the woman across the table. Who are you? She introduced herself. A realtor from a firm in Roanoke. She had the look of someone who was beginning to realize she'd walked into something she hadn't been briefed on. I've been working with Derek on the property assessment. Assessment of my property. I turned back to him. Without asking me. Bob, please. Amy's voice was careful. Controlled. We've been trying to find the right time to talk to you about this. You and Mom aren't getting any younger, and this property is. It's a lot. It's 22 acres and a 100-year-old farmhouse and the two of you out here alone. I'm 63, I said. I ran a department of 40 detectives. I'm not sure what threshold I need to clear before you consider me capable of managing a farmhouse. My son-in-law leaned back slightly and did the thing I'd watched him do for 4 years. The micro-adjustment where he decides he needs a different approach. His voice went softer. We're worried about Ruth. He said it with genuine-looking concern. She's been having episodes, Bob. Forgetting things. Getting confused. Last month, she couldn't remember Amy's phone number. The month before that, she left the stove on overnight. I watched him. I thought about Ruth in the bedroom 20 minutes ago, not quite herself, her eyes slow to focus, her words coming out slightly thick. I thought about the mug on the nightstand. Where is Ruth's physician in all of this? I asked. He reached into a folder on the table and slid a document across to me. We went ahead and had her evaluated. Given the symptoms, Dr. Warren, geriatric cognitive specialist, Roanoke Memorial. The report was dated 6 weeks ago. 2 pages. Clinical language about observed memory deficits and recommended follow-up, with a recommendation for supervised living assessment. I read it twice. I'm thorough. 31 years. Then I found it. Ruth's date of birth was listed correctly. Her address was listed correctly. But under the section noting when observations had been gathered, the evaluating physician had written a date in March. Mid-March. I knew exactly where Ruth and I had been in mid-March. We'd driven down to visit Daniel and his family for our granddaughter's birthday. We were in Roanoke for 5 days. Ruth was with me the entire time, not in any doctor's office in this county. I set the document down. I looked at my son-in-law. What's Dr. Warren's office number? He blinked. What? The physician's office number. I'd like to call and confirm the appointment date. Amy straightened up from the counter. Dad, what are you doing? Due diligence, I said. I've been doing it for 31 years. It's reflex. Something moved across his face then. The first crack. Small, but I'd spent my career watching for cracks. This report was prepared by a colleague Dr. Warren referred us to, he said. I may have the date slightly wrong. These things get complicated. Complicated, I said. Right. I took the document and walked back to the bedroom, closing the door behind me. Ruth looked up. I sat beside her and showed her the paper. Have you ever seen this doctor? Have you ever been evaluated for memory problems? Never. She looked at the letterhead. I've never heard of this person. Bob, I have my annual physical with Dr. Patterson every November, and everything is fine. She paused. My tea. Something was wrong with my tea this morning. I noticed it, but I drank it anyway because Amy made it for me and I didn't want to seem ungrateful. I put my arm around her. I'm going to need you to be strong for the next little while. She lifted her chin. Tell me what's happening. Someone is trying to take our house. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very calmly, over my dead body. That's my girl, I told her. I walked back to the kitchen. The realtor had gathered her papers and was edging toward the door with the quiet urgency of someone who has correctly identified an exit. I let her go. The man taking photographs outside had apparently received some signal because his car was already gone. My son-in-law was on his feet. Amy stood beside him, arms still crossed, but her jaw was working like she was chewing something she couldn't quite swallow. Here's what I know, I said. I sat down at my own kitchen table. I spent 3 decades building cases, and I'm going to tell you what this one looks like from where I'm sitting. He started to interrupt. I kept going. You're in financial trouble. My best guess is it's been building for about 18 months. You're a real estate broker in a market that's shifted and you've been leveraged wrong. Or you've made some other kind of bet that didn't pay off. This property is worth somewhere between $800,000 and $1.2 million on today's market. If you could get Ruth and me declared incompetent, obtain power of attorney, and move us into a facility, you could develop or sell this land and solve your problem. You brought in a fake medical evaluation to start building a paper trail. You gave my wife something this morning to keep her compliant while you had the realtor through the house. The kitchen was very quiet. Bob, Amy said softly, you don't understand the situation we're in. Then explain it to me. Because right now what I understand is that you drugged your mother. She flinched like I'd slapped her. I didn't. I didn't know he was going to. She looked at her husband, and something ugly moved through her expression. You told me it was just something to help her relax. You said she was worked up and it would just calm her down for a few hours. He said nothing. His jaw was set. Worked up about what? I asked Amy. She swallowed. He had some documents for her to sign. A healthcare proxy. A financial power of attorney. She didn't want to sign them and she started asking too many questions and he said he had something that would settle her nerves. I looked at my son-in-law. He was doing the calculation behind his eyes. I watched him arrive at the conclusion that there was no version of this conversation he could control anymore. I want you to leave, I said. He leaned forward. Bob, listen to me. You're 63 years old. Ruth is 61. This property is a liability. You need 40 hours of maintenance every month and you're not going to be able to keep that up indefinitely. I was trying to help you transition before things got worse, before one of you fell, or there was an accident, or you gave my wife a sedative without her consent, I said quietly, and you forged a physician's evaluation. I know the difference between helping someone and building a case against them. His voice hardened. You can't prove anything. I picked up my phone and called my son. Daniel answered on the second ring. He worked a Tuesday to Thursday office schedule from home in the mornings, and I knew he'd pick up. Dad, what's up? I need you at the house. Now. Bring everything you've been looking at. A beat of silence. Then, on my way. Don't let them leave. Amy looked at me. Everything he's been looking at? What does that mean? Your brother has been worried about your husband's finances for about 6 months. He's a CPA. It's what he does. He looks at numbers and he sees where they go. Her face changed. For the first time since I'd walked into the kitchen, I saw something break through the controlled surface she'd been maintaining. Not anger. Something more like the expression of a person who has been told a truth they already suspected but had been working very hard not to confirm. Amy, I said. I kept my voice even. How much? She looked at her husband. He looked at the wall. She said, $240,000. The room was quiet. He had a system, she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. Sports betting. He said he had a system that was working and then it wasn't, and then he was chasing it, and then the people he borrowed from weren't the kind of people who accept payment plans. The people he borrowed from. I looked at him. Who exactly? A partner in a real estate deal, he said. Private money. The terms got complicated. Meaning loan shark, I said. He said nothing. I thought about my daughter, and I chose my next words carefully. Amy, when did you find out? 3 months ago. She sat down at the table. He came to me and said, we were in serious trouble and he had a plan. He said it would be good for you and Mom in the long run, that you needed to think about transitioning anyway, that the property was too much for you, and we could find you somewhere beautiful, somewhere with activities and medical staff. She pressed her hands flat on the table. I told myself it was helping you. Did you tell yourself that when he put something in your mother's tea this morning? She put her face in her hands. My son arrived in just under 30 minutes. He came through the door the way he always did when something was wrong. Moving fast. His laptop bag over one shoulder. His expression already set. He looked at his sister. He looked at his brother-in-law. He looked at me. Is Mom okay? She's in the bedroom. She was given something. I need you to sit with her while I handle this. He went down the hall first and was back in 2 minutes. His face was tight. She's starting to feel better. Whatever it was is wearing off. He opened his laptop on the kitchen table without sitting down. You want to do this now? I want to do this now. He turned the screen toward Amy and her husband. For the last 4 months, he said, his voice carrying the particular flatness of a person who is very angry and is not going to let it show, I've been putting together a picture of where Derek's money has gone. Casino records where they were publicly accessible. Business filings. LLC registrations. 3 shell companies opened in the last 2 years and dissolved within 18 months each. He scrolled. Wire transfers to a private lender not registered in the state of Virginia. And this, he tapped the screen. The physician whose name is on that evaluation you prepared. I called his office this morning after Dad called me from the road. Amy looked at her husband. Dr. Warren has never met Ruth, Daniel said. He has no patient by that name. His office manager was extremely interested to hear that someone had used his letterhead to fabricate a cognitive evaluation. She took my number and said their attorney would be in contact. It's a forgery, I said. I already knew it, but I wanted it said out loud in that kitchen. My son-in-law stood up. I'm not doing this. He moved toward the door. I stepped in front of it. I wasn't angry. Anger is something you feel when a situation is still uncertain. I was past that. We're going to wait for the sheriff's office, I said. You can't hold us here. No. But you're going to stay anyway, because if you walk out that door, you're going to have to explain to the people you owe money to why the property deal fell through and why the man whose house you were trying to take is now standing in a sheriff's office giving your names to investigators. Sitting down is your best option right now. He sat down. What followed was 2 of the quietest and most exhausting hours of my life. Ruth came out of the bedroom around 1 o'clock, steadier on her feet, and sat at the table with a glass of water and said nothing for a long time. She just looked at her daughter. Amy couldn't hold her mother's gaze for more than a few seconds at a stretch. At some point, Amy said, Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought it would be okay. I thought he was going to take care of everything, and nobody was going to get hurt. Ruth said, You should have come to us. Whatever trouble you were in, you should have come to us. He said you'd say no. Amy's voice was raw. He said you'd judge us and tell us to figure it out ourselves. He said the only way to fix it was to handle the property, and once it was done, you'd understand why we did it. Your father and I spent 30 years as public employees, Ruth said. We never turned away a person in need. You knew that about us. You have always known that. Amy put her head down on her arms at the table and cried. The 2 deputies who responded knew me. which made things both simpler and more complicated in the way that small community law enforcement always did. I gave my statement clearly and without editorializing. Daniel presented his documentation. Ruth gave a statement about the tea and what she'd been asked to sign. The empty mug had been bagged as soon as I'd thought to do it. They arrested my son-in-law on charges of fraud, forgery, and administering a substance without consent. He was handcuffed in my kitchen and walked out past the apple orchard Ruth planted, past the porch where we watched meteor showers, past the barn his realtor had photographed for a listing that was never going to exist. Amy was not arrested that day. But the detective who took her statement, a woman I'd worked alongside for 7 years before she transferred to the department, was direct with her. You were present during the planning and execution of this scheme. That's a conversation for the Commonwealth's attorney. Amy nodded. She understood. She looked in that moment like someone who had finally stopped running from a truth they'd been carrying for months. And the relief and the devastation were arriving at exactly the same time. What followed moved the way legal proceedings always move, which is to say slowly and with a great deal of paperwork. The Commonwealth's Attorney's Office built the case over the following 3 months. The private lender who had made the threats turned out to be a former business associate operating under a predatory contract arrangement that was itself legally questionable, which gave prosecutors additional material to work with. My son-in-law's attorney tried 3 different approaches to minimizing the charges. None of them accounted for Daniel's documentation or the forged physician letter or the toxicology results from Ruth's blood draw, which showed a mild sedative compound consistent with crushed sleep medication dissolved in liquid. He pleaded guilty to 3 of the 5 counts in exchange for a reduced sentence. The judge accepted the plea and sentenced him to 4 years, with eligibility for parole review after 30 months. The judge was particular in his remarks about the nature of the crime: the deliberate targeting of people in their 60s who had committed no wrong, the fabrication of medical documents designed to strip them of legal standing over their own lives and property. He called it a calculated assault on the dignity of people who deserved protection, not exploitation. Amy's situation was different. The Commonwealth's attorney ultimately did not file criminal charges against her, a decision that was not without controversy and that I was not asked to weigh in on, though I had opinions. What did happen was that her nursing license, which she had held for 9 years, came under review by the state board. When the details of the case became part of the public record, she lost it. The review board found that her role in the administration of an unprescribed sedative to a patient, even outside a clinical setting, even to her own mother, was incompatible with the professional obligations of her license. She was formally barred from nursing practice in the state of Virginia. As part of a restorative justice arrangement that the victim's advocate proposed and that Ruth and I agreed to, Amy was required to participate in an elder abuse awareness program run by the county and to give a public statement at a community forum on financial elder exploitation. It was held on a Thursday evening at a church hall in Daleville with about 70 people in attendance, mostly older residents, some social workers, 2 county commissioners. Ruth and I sat in the second row. Amy stood at the front of the room in a gray dress with her hair pulled back, and she looked like she had aged 5 years in 6 months. Her hands shook slightly when she adjusted the microphone. "My name is Amy," she said. "2 years ago I married someone I loved and trusted. 8 months ago I found out that trust had been misplaced in ways I should have caught sooner. 4 months ago I stood in my parents' kitchen and watched my mother ask why she felt so strange, and I knew the answer, and I said nothing." She paused. "That is something I will carry for the rest of my life." She spoke for about 12 minutes. She talked about how financial desperation doesn't announce itself as desperation. She talked about how a person can convince themselves that they're doing something for someone else when every honest signal they have is telling them otherwise. She talked about the specific, quiet cruelty of looking at someone who has worked and built and sacrificed and deciding that they are a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. She talked about her father being 63 years old and still the sharpest person she'd ever known. She talked about her mother, who spent 28 years in pediatric nursing taking care of other people's children, being given a sedative in her own kitchen by the people who were supposed to love her. She did not look at us when she said those things. I understood why. When she was finished, there was no applause. People nodded. A few of them cried. One woman raised her hand and asked a question about how to protect a parent's property title, and the victim's advocate took over from there. Ruth and I didn't speak to Amy afterward. We drove home in the dark, and Ruth made chamomile tea, which I noticed and didn't say anything about. And we sat on the porch in the cold and looked at the Blue Ridge line against the night sky. Ruth said, "I keep trying to remember when she changed. I can't find the moment." "I don't think there was one moment," I said. "I think it was a lot of small ones that added up." "Do you blame yourself?" "For a moment." Then I said honestly, "I blame the situation. And I blame the choice she made inside it. Is that different from blaming her?" I thought about it. Yes. Because the choice means she could have done otherwise. And she didn't. But it also means she could choose differently from here. Ruth leaned her head against my shoulder. "Do you think she will?" "I don't know." Winter passed. Daniel and his wife brought our granddaughter over most weekends, and the little girl was at the age where everything on the farm was miraculous. The chickens, the apple trees, the frost patterns on the barn windows. I taught her to identify deer tracks in the mud along the fence line. Ruth taught her to make pie crust from scratch. These were the Saturdays that held everything together. In February, a card arrived from Amy with a return address in Richmond, where she'd moved to be near a friend. It was a plain card, nothing printed inside, just her handwriting. She wrote that she had started therapy, that she had found work doing office administration for a nonprofit, that she was not asking for anything, not forgiveness, not contact, just to let us know that she was trying to live differently than she had that November. Ruth read it twice and set it on the mantel. In March, I started mentoring a young detective in the department who reminded me of myself 30 years ago. Too impatient, too certain, but with good instincts underneath. I went in twice a week. It felt useful. It felt like the right way to spend the time I had. The spring came the way it always did in the valley. Slow and then all at once. Ruth's apple orchard bloomed in late April. The whole south fence line going white and fragrant over the course of about a week. We sat on the porch and watched it the way we'd been watching things on that porch for 30 years. "I keep thinking about what that realtor would have written in her listing," Ruth said. "Prime acreage. Blue Ridge views. Historical farmhouse. Motivated sellers." I almost laughed. Motivated sellers. Instead of. The orchard took 20 years to mature, and I planted every single tree, and the kitchen window looks exactly the right direction in the morning, and my husband rewired this house himself, and he knows every inch of it. Nobody puts that in a listing. "They should," she said. I put my arm around her. "They really should." Thanksgiving came around again, and Daniel's family came up on Wednesday and stayed through the weekend. His daughter helped Ruth make the cranberry sauce from scratch and ate 3 spoonfuls of it before it was even fully cooled, and denied it completely when asked. I smoked a brisket on the porch in the cold and thought about how this was exactly what the property was supposed to be used for, exactly what the 22 acres and the old farmhouse and the orchard and the barn were for. On Friday evening, Daniel showed me his phone. "Amy texted me," he said. "She asked how everyone was." I looked at the message. It was short, just a few lines. She hoped the holiday was good. She said she thought about the farm. She said she was doing okay. "Are you going to respond?" I asked him. He looked at me. "What do you think? That's between you and your sister. She's your sister. I can't tell you what that's worth to you." He nodded slowly. He typed something brief and set the phone down. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood on the porch in the November cold and looked at the property line where the orchard met the darkness. The stars were out the way they only get in rural Virginia in November, thick and close. Here's what I knew, standing there. I knew that a person can build something real with enough work and enough time. I knew that the people you love can become strangers through a series of choices you never saw coming, and that this is one of the more painful things about being alive. I knew that a 63-year-old man with good instincts and a son who knows how to read financial records is not a person who can be easily taken from what he's built. I knew that trust and forgiveness are not the same thing, and that you can choose one without the other, or choose neither for now, or hold both of them at a careful distance while you figure out what kind of person you're dealing with going forward. I knew that Ruth was inside making decaf in the kitchen with the lights on, and that in the morning we would have leftover brisket and my granddaughter would want to go look for deer tracks, and that the apple trees would be bare but they'd come back in April the way they always did. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is protect what you built, and outlast the people who wanted to take it. Sometimes that has to be enough, at least for now. The farm was still ours. The life Ruth and I had made with our own hands was still ours. Whatever came next, that much was true. And no piece of forged paperwork or smooth-talking scheme was ever going to change it. We'd survived, and the orchard was going to bloom again in the spring, just like it always had.